This is episode 327 of the I Read Comic Books podcast. With me this week are two wonderful ladies I love to talk comics with, Kait Scotchless.
Hello.
And Tia Vasiliou.
Hello. And who are you, dear podcast
I'm Kait Lamphere.
MC?
Thank you for asking. Some days I can remember my own name, but it's not today.
God, is that you?
Our benevolent overlord, Mike Raffin, is moving this weekend into his shiny new home in New Jersey. So we are here.
It's very exciting, but he's not available, so here I am.
Dad's not home.
He's just let us know that he's
It's
eating
fine.
chicken wings.
All right, I can do this right?
Yeah.
Okay. I've been told that I have to ask two questions, and those are, how are you, and how have comic books been? Let's start with you, Kait Scotchless.
I have been good. I have really enjoyed stepping in for Mike this week because it gave me the perfect excuse to have like a completely perfect lazy Saturday reading comics for like 4 hours like a slug on my porch in our finely beautiful spring weather that we just got. It's been like 30-40 degrees here in Michigan. So that was chef kiss wonderful. Other than what I read specifically for this episode, so we'll talk about in the second half, I have been reading the Babysitter's Club graphic novels still. My library just got numbers 10 and 11 in, so I read number 10, Kristy and the Snobs. If you're an 80s, 90s girl, you'll remember these books by Anne M. Martin. So at this point, we've had a lot of different creators working on the Babysitter's Club graphic novels. And this one is now done by Chan Chow, both the script adaptation and the art. And she's not Raina Telgemeier. It would have been my dream come true to have Raina Telgemeier keep doing the whole series. I get why she didn't and couldn't, and how she's an incredibly hard act to follow. So all things considered, I have liked this a lot. And this is the book, if you guys remember, where Kristy gets bullied when she moves into her Tony new neighborhood after her mom remarries and she moves into like her stepdad's mansion, right? So these rich girls start picking on her in their new neighborhood because she's not all preppy and all that. And worst of all, to her horror, they make fun of her dog, Louie, who is old and sick. Can you imagine? Ugh.
Right to jail.
So, yeah, exactly. Fuck them kids. So this is like the thing about the Babysitter's Club and middle grade OGNs in general that keeps me coming back year after year at this point in the pandemic is that when everything is bad and hard and unsolvable in the world, as it seems, you can rely on middle grade books to always have a nice solution through the power of friendship and love and understanding. And will the dog die? Probably not, because it's a middle grade book. So it's very... they're the best like read before bed books for me right now while I'm stressed about like so many things in the world and in my own personal life and stuff. They're just very wholesome and I love them.
Okay, but like spoiler alert, I'm very sorry to tell you that the dog does in fact die.
I know, Tia. Yeah. Louie's been in 10 books, okay? He can't keep going forever.
He's very old and sick.
He's very old and sick indeed. The thing, okay, so much of this series now, because it is updated for like the modern age, right? It's like so much of the messages that I feel like we needed as children and maybe didn't get because our boomer parents weren't on the level of like, it's good to talk about feelings and like it's okay to do, be sad and different things like that. So much of it is like just like oh, you're right, author. This is okay. I will feel my feelings.
Isn't Alicia Silverstone the mom in the Netflix Babysitter's Club show? Because I feel like that's...
They did such a good job with that series. I loved it so much.
Oh, I know.
So good. So wholesome. I definitely binged both seasons when they came out.
Me too.
For the same reason. It's just like feel good in a time when so much is not and feels like big and like I usually am very into shows like Homeland and stuff that are like big, like tense drama thrillers and stuff like that with like complex issues and nothing's truly resolvable and all that. And then it's like, no, life is like that now. I don't need that right now. That's got enough of that.
I just binge watched 15 seasons of ER for exactly the reason that you just described. I was like, I want to watch something that is drama, but also that is pre 9/11.
I have never actually seen that. That's one of those things perpetually on my like backlog of this is supposedly extremely good and I've never seen it. And there's a lot of it if I ever like get the flu or something, you know.
Yeah, it definitely, I started in December, so it took me a while. It is really good. I have to say it goes off the rails. This is the I Watch ER podcast. No. Well, but yes, like on the topic of nostalgia and just kind of like the relative simplicity of the before times, I totally feel you.
Yeah.
Once Uncle Jesse joins the cast of ER, it's and 9/11 happens, then it's kind of, you just are sort of watching for the closure.
That makes sense. I was very into Grey's Anatomy until I've not watched the last couple seasons cuz it kind of did the off the rails thing and I lost interest.
Comics are great.
Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, speaking of
comics. What have you guys been reading?
Well,
Tia, go ahead.
yeah, so the last time I was on the show, which I don't know, maybe was a month ago now, I said I was looking forward to reading a book about comics called The Content of Our Caricature, African American Comic Art and Political Belonging by Rebecca Wanzo. Dr. Wanzo was someone I got to work with when I was in grad school. I TA'd for her wonderful class on sex, gender, and pop culture. I learned everything from her. She is brilliant, and her book won the Eisner Award in 2021 for scholarly work in comics. And everyone,
This book or a different one?
This one.
Okay.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just have not been able to read in like a year, so I'm only just not getting around to reading it. But I think that if anyone's intimidated by reading academic books about comics, definitely check this out. Dr. Wanzo is very, very, very smart, but also it's a very easy book to read. She doesn't get like, she's a good writer, so it isn't like really mired in a lot of opaque academic nonsense. It's very good, like very clearly states that what the purpose of this book and kind of chapter by chapter what we're going to be learning and what kind of material we're looking at. So this is mainly looking at cartoon and comic art and caricature within those mediums, and kind of trying to discern what is the visual grammar of citizenship in the United States as it relates to African Americans. And so she says in the introduction that comic art is a medium in which the use of caricature and other aesthetic techniques to stereotype bodies is essential to constructing meaning. So basically, the way that people are portrayed in comic art is creating meaning about who those identities are and how we understand those identities. She says also caricatures work with the various other aspects of cartoon and comic art, such as the panel, the gutter, and closure to produce meaning and narrative sequence. So the actual formal elements of comics includes this visual grammar that she talks about. And if you've been listening to me on this podcast, you know that I love talking about big, complex ideas and how they apply to pop culture, which is actually something I learned from Dr. Wanzo. And she also says in the book, rather than treat cartoon and comic art as obscure ephemera, this book invites readers to recognize the wide circulation of comic and cartoon art in contributing to a common language of national belonging and exclusion in the United States. So not only is she looking at the formal way that these identities are portrayed using caricature and other uh, you know aesthetic techniques, which I talked about a moment ago, but then it kind of telescopes out and looks at how they contribute to more abstractly to ideas of belonging and identity and all of that. So like a really great example is just for example, Superman is an alien, right? And a lot of Superman stories are about Superman being kind of fundamentally different, but Superman is white, and that whiteness is really essential to people's understanding of Superman's identity and
Yeah.
like how he fits in to belonging and ideas of citizenship in the United States. And it really got me thinking about also like X-Men, for example, and how they are supposed to be this grand metaphor for civil rights. And it's frustrating that we can only talk about these ideas using mainly white characters, like
Yeah.
um that you almost have to sneak these lessons in, but by doing that you kind of reinforce the problem.
Mm-hmm.
In any case, the book goes into historical, political cartoons and superhero comics alike. It's a really great book. So that is I'm deep in that currently.
That sounds really
Sounds
cool.
really
So
good.
it sounds like this could be a textbook type book though. Is this priced as a textbook or as a normal book?
No, I think it was like, I don't know, less than $30.
Perfect. Okay. Because sometimes I hear about cool books like this, and then I find out that it's intended as a textbook and like put out by like Princeton University or something, and so it's like $70 for a thing. I'm like, oh. So
Yeah.
okay.
It's New York University Press. I was able to get it in like a paperback, and
Oh,
I'm
nice.
sure that it is used as a textbook by people, but it's also it's also just like a good nonfiction book about
Okay.
comics. So
Cool. Yeah. There's a difference
um,
between like
I feel like
is
it's
used versus intended for and priced accordingly.
Yeah.
yeah. When I got it on Amazon, I'm just looking it up really quickly now. The hardcover is very expensive. You can get it on Kindle for about $15 and the paperback's
Oh, nice.
$29. So
Okay. Cool. That is very accessible then.
It's cool that you had a professor who had a book out and then the book actually ended up being really good, because I've had professors that have books and then they're not great. But I'm glad
maybe
that
you didn't
No.
read them anyway.
yeah, but I'm glad that you like this.
I have had multiple professors do that where they like write their own book and then make you buy that book for their class and you're like this feels wrong. But yeah.
I mean, I understand why they do that. I feel
Yeah.
like but this is genuinely a really good book. And like I said, I, I think that the way that Dr. Wanzo writes makes it accessible, but you'll definitely feel smarter after you read this book for sure. And that's what I loved about her. Like we studied Twilight in the class I TA'd for her. It was
Oh
great.
my
I
gosh.
had a kid write a paper, a brilliant Freudian analysis of like Jean Grey and Phoenix and all. Like it just was such a cool moment to be able to actually take pop culture seriously and get a lot out of it.
That sounds
Yeah, that sounds like
fantastic. I'm with Danny in the chat right now saying, "How do I take that class?" Like that does sound really
yeah.
cool. Um
I wonder if she would come on the show. Ooh, I should email her.
Tia, make it
yes.
happen. Tia and your connections. Yes,
Uh,
please.
I'll try to dig up the syllabus from when I TA'd a million years ago. It was great.
That does sound really cool. It sounds pretty similar to the book I read about like feminist comics and the kind of way in which feminist comics and zines shaped the early feminist movement. And now I'll have to dig back through Goodreads and find the title of it. But it was really interesting. But that one was one of those giant, floppy, oversized art books where you have to basically read it on the floor. You know, when they make it, it's like it's a 2 foot long spine. And I'm like, thanks.
Oh gosh.
My first like assignment as Dr. Wanzo's TA was to scan like her copies of women's comics so that the students could read them because they're so hard to I think that Fantagraphics has since put out women's comics in hardcover, but at the time it was like if you had
Yeah.
copies, they were so hard to come by, and yeah, like it's not easy to find.
Yeah, I mean, like the size made sense because of like scaling some of they weren't high quality prints to begin with, especially some of these zines, and then if you scaled them down, you'd never be able to read the comic. So it made sense. It was just I just remember reading that uh the the kid pose propped up on your elbows on your stomach, like on the carpet.
Yeah.
How about you, Kate? What have you been reading?
Thank you. I really quick wanted to mention that there is a Discord book club on April 30th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and they are reading The Death of Doctor Strange. I keep wanting to get involved in this Discord book club because they've got great conversations, but it's always when I have D&D. So if you are interested, please jump on. I read Heartstopper Volume 4 this week, and by this week I mean last night at like midnight, because I couldn't wait. The Netflix show came out on Friday, and it covers Volume 1, and I watched the entire thing that night. It was only about 4 hours of show, so I went from working in a chair to sitting in a different chair and watching television until I went to bed.
This is the first time I heard that they made a show of this, and I am so excited. I am going to check this out like tonight because I love this series too. I have not read volume 4 yet. I'm only through volume 3, but I'm very excited just to see
Yeah,
like the casting and like is there good chemistry between the leads? Like, oh, exciting.
yeah, I think that they did a good job. I mean, like the characters look a little bit different than they did in the comic book, which is gonna happen because, it's art versus real life. But so it was like a little bit of an adjustment for me. And then I think that there was like a range of time where it was like, are these characters going to have chemistry? But that range of time is when they were beginning to know each other. So like by the time they actually start dating, it's like, yes, yeah, so this book is created by Alice Oseman, and I read volumes 1 through 3 in like 2 days. So this book is very good. It is about two high school boys falling in love, and volume 1 is about them growing close and deciding to date, and then the rest of the series is them being in a relationship and like helping one another with their problems and learning about one another. And I just really like this series. I talked about it a few weeks ago on the show, and I just feel like so many series focus on will they, won't they get together, but the series they get together pretty immediately, and then they're in the relationship, and like that's what the story is about, is the relationship as opposed to the courtship.
I feel like you
um,
could, for the back of the plot summary for like 1 through 3, you could just put squee, and that's like basically a
yeah,
summary of the series. It's like very
yeah.
cute and warm and fuzzy in a way that I have enjoyed reading. But they're such fast reads.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I do have to say that after they're like there was some discussion of like one of them is getting bullied and one of them doesn't know how to come out to his parents. So there is like some real life issues happening as well. And volume 4 gets very real because one of them has a eating disorder, and this volume is exploring how the other one should be like helping them. And there's a lot of research that goes into this like in the story, and like trying to figure out what to do and react and help. And so so warning for eating disorders. It was occasionally difficult to read, like I love these characters so much, and I it hurts to see them going through something so hard. But on the other hand, I feel like I learned something from this book where, like, if I encounter someone in that situation, how would I help,
Yeah.
And not having been in that situation, I think it was handled very well.
Nice.
I also wanted to really quick just mention that I read another manga. I've been reading a lot of manga. This is my Babysitter's Club read, I think. Beyond the Clouds Volume 2 by Nick. This is a manga, but when I was trying to read more about this series and about this creator, I discovered that the bande dessinée crowd really like takes to this. A lot of the analysis or like descriptions that I found were in French, so I was like, "Hang on, is this a manga?" And the series begins. Volume 1 introduces a Tinkerstown where a winged girl crashes, and she's taken in by a found family of like partially animal people. And there were a lot of like subplots and backstories and like character depth kind of hinted in Volume 1. So I was like, oh man, this is going to get big. But then Volume 2 kind of focuses in on one of those caretakers, Theo, finding ways to try to heal her from like her injuries that she sustained when she crashed. And they end up setting off on an adventure together, like leaving the Tinker's Village and going to this larger merchant city where there are like different difficulties for them, because this is like a totally different experience for them both being in this new large town. And so far, the story is still very whimsical and the characters are still very caring. And I really hope that it stays that way because I want to keep reading it. I really hope that it doesn't get like difficult for them. Like, I hope that they encounter obstacles and then they overcome them, as opposed to it like hindering their story.
I have not read that much manga, but I will say of the series I've read, they seem to be tonally consistent volume to volume. I've not seen a dramatic shift from like whimsical to like hard and gritty, you know? So
Yeah,
I think you're probably
with
safe.
the half animal people, that is a theme that I have noticed when stories are sexy, and this is not a book that I want to have get sexy. Like, so when I opened this and I saw that artwork, I was like, "Oh boy." What
Yeah,
is
I'm
this gonna
so
be?
jaded with manga that I'm just like, give it time.
Yeah. All right. So, what are you guys excited for? Either something that's being released soon, or it can be something you've had for a little while. Tia, how about if we start with you?
Yes, I have to friendly reminder everyone that Bloodstained Teeth is coming out this week. This is the creator-owned book by Christian Ward and Patrick Reynolds. You may be familiar with Christian Ward's art. He did Odyssey, and it's just one of the most beautiful books ever. I could talk forever about Odyssey. And also, I think he's doing art on an upcoming Aquaman book that Ram V is writing, which is also going to be like spectacularly beautiful. I can already tell. But I'm super pumped to see two creators who are just very extremely talented and also genuinely cool people doing a creator owned book that everyone is super hyped for. It's basically like about a vampire who is not a good person and will accept money to turn you into a vampire. And I imagine that all sorts of late stage capitalist critique will occur in this book, but also cool vampire shit. And Patrick is amazing. He's done a lot of work for Dark Horse and just like such an incredibly talented artist. And I'm just so excited for this book.
So basically,
Yeah.
what if Bella was actually just fundraising through 4 books to like babysit, raise enough money with after school jobs to pay Edward to become a vampire?
Wouldn't it be awesome though if she actually paid this character and then showed up and was like, surprise, Edward?
Yes, I would watch that remake. This sounds really cool. I want to check that out too.
I was also looking at this in the new releases website that I check, but then I saw something else that I that I've been more excited for. But I'll have to add this to my to read list. Kate, what about you?
I am excited for YA OGN that I just picked up on a sale, and it's still on sale as of recording on the April 24th here. But it's Squad by Maggie Tokuda Hall and art by Lisa Sterl. That's probably not how you pronounce that. But this is YA OGN from Green Willow Books, which it turns out is a HarperCollins imprint. I was like, I've never heard of these comic people before, but turns out. Where a new girl is invited to join, she like moves schools and she's invited to join the high school's most popular like girl clique. kind of like Mean Girlsy, right? But finds out they're werewolves. And the description on the back says it's Pretty Little Liars meets Teen Wolf in this fast-paced, sharply funny, and patriarchy-smashing graphic novel. And then Amazon's like, "Do you want this for $1.99?" And I'm like, "You know I do, Amazon." So this is where I'm at. It is also tagged as LGBTQ plus on Goodreads. So fingers crossed that's not like, I hate when it's tagged like that and then it'll be like a one-page like background scene or something. Like, I hope this does turn out to also be queer. This was a Goodreads Choice Award nominee for graphic novels and comics in 2021, but I completely missed it. This was not on my radar until it came across my email on. I get like a daily like best sales kind of email from Book Riot that is for both books and comics, and this was on there, and I was like, oh, that looks super cool. So I'm excited. This looks kind of Riverdale-y and kind of Mean Girls-y and kind of a lot of things that I think look a lot of fun. So I'm jazzed. Have either of you read this?
No,
No,
but
but
it
I just
sounds
added it to my
awesome.
to read.
Yeah.
It's still $1.99, Kate, if you want to get it on Amazon. Now that Amazon Kindle is Comixology is what, like that's all merged together. What are you looking forward to?
I would like to mention that Danny is joining us on the Discord chat today. You can also join us on Discord if you would like to tune in on Sundays, usually 1 o'clock. This week it was 3 o'clock. That might happen occasionally. Danny's pick is X-Men Knights of X #1. And normally, if Mike were hosting, he would probably have some more to say about this, but I don't know what this is other than an X-Men book. So I hope that it's great.
I can actually tell you a lot about it. There's X-Men in it, and they like fight other people with powers, I think. And they
Do they
do
also
talk
cry?
about being X-Men. Yeah, yeah, they have a lot of emotions, and sometimes they talk about them, and sometimes they just use their powers like angstily. Um,
Does
yeah,
anyone
Danny says
dress
we
slutty?
nailed it. I knew it.
Because okay. The dressing slutty also feels like a really integral part of X-Men.
The full body spandex.
Yeah,
Yep.
boob windows.
Yep.
All right, so it's to change course a little bit. I am excited for something probably less slutty. I hope, because it's a kid's book. It's History Comics, The National Parks. This is by Fallon Koch, and it releases this Wednesday. This is from First Second, and they keep making books that I continue to like. This is similar. I hope this is similar to the Makers Comics books that First Second also puts out. And that series is where you learn skills through like a story that's in the book, but then it's like about how to garden or how to bake or how to make cosplaying clothes. So my theory is that this is going to be another story with characters, but then you learn about the national parks, and I hope that that is. I hope that that's the case, and I hope that it's really good because I really like what First Second is doing, and then their nonfiction comics are like educational and also really good. And I think that I've actually seen this advertised before I saw it on the new releases list. So this has kind of been on my radar for a little while, and now it's going to be out.
Cool.
I'm also excited for a few books that I have had for a good 6 months that I am borrowing from a friend who I'm seeing next weekend. And I haven't read these yet. as as does happen usually only with the things that I own.
Yep.
This is Sailor Moon Eternal Volumes 3 and 4 by Naoku Takeuchi. And this is kind of like your Babysitter's Club series again,
Mm-hmm.
Kate. It's something that I'm reading because it's nostalgic and it's an easy read. It's also really uplifting to read this Eternals edition because the translation that I read that is from the 1990s was translated very, I don't want to say badly. I mean, they still translated it,
Yeah.
they could have just not done that, but they definitely made it censored, and they reversed the art because it was manga,
Yeah.
and these editions are much more true to the source material.
Nice. I didn't realize that's what the Eternals editions were for.
Yeah, and then the friend that I'm borrowing these from, she actually has these really nice kind of like maybe 8.5 by 11 sized art versus the little like digest
Oh,
editions that I have from the 1990s. So reading them, one, I can't really read them in bed because they are like a lap book,
yeah.
but at the same time, they are like I can see more of the details in the art and it's easier to read, especially because my eyes are no longer 15 years old.
I might need to check these out, see if my library has these because this sounds cool. I think I tried a few pages of that. So I didn't do Sailor Moon as a kid, so I do not have nostalgia factor. So when I picked up and read a few pages of the 90s Sailor Moon when I was like, eh. Um, so maybe this is the on-ramp that I've
Yeah.
been looking for.
Yeah. I I can't say that they're very different because it is the same story, but the translation is much better.
Cool.
All right, let's take a quick break and we'll come back with our topic, which is a Goodreads Book of the Month tie in about anthologies. This week, we're going to be talking about anthologies, and this is a Goodreads Book of the Month tie-in episode. If you have any anthologies that you would like to discuss or suggest, please check out our Goodreads group and drop those in the chat for April. We do have a specific theme every month that changes. Recently, we have been taking a theme and having people suggest books that fit those themes, maybe telling us what they think of them, making recommendations, and so on. It's a lot more loose than it used to be, where we had to focus on one book. But I don't know. I think that we've really gotten a lot more input. It seems like people are enjoying it quite a bit. So we are probably doing that going forward. And that's pretty much what we ended up doing for this show as well, is, talking about the anthologies that we have read or that we want to read. And if somebody in the Goodreads group suggested those, at least I mentioned those people. So thank you for your suggestions if you are part of that group. I guess I'm excited to talk about something, so I'm just gonna start.
Perfect.
I this was a Goodreads suggestion by Tom. It's the Old Guard Tales Through Time, and I love the Old Guard books so much. And for some reason, it took me years to even read the first one, and then I have read it like 4 times since then. So when this mini series started coming out, this anthology series, it was immediately on my radar. Except that I can't remember when it came out, but I wasn't really picking up singles, and I was like, as soon as this is out in trade, I'm gonna read it, and it's been out in trade for a while and I haven't read it. So thank you so much to Tom for the reminder. The original story was created by Greg Rucka and Leandro Fernandez, and this is a very star-studded book of creators, an incredible just group of people: Kelly Sue DeConnick, Raphael Albuquerque, Matt Fraction, just to begin with. There are a number of stories in this anthology, and they just add depth to Andy's relationship to Achilles. Nikki and Joe's relationship, it really bulks that up. Like they're so happy in volume one, and it's like, do you guys ever argue? Well, this book will answer that for you. And then it also had a number of stories about Booker, which is really interesting. Like he's kind of the only person that you ever see like alone doing his own thing. And of course, I don't know, he's a little bit, not that any of them are pacifists, but I feel like he is the least pacifist of all of them. So you kind of get a couple of stories from him. And this theme of purpose, like what is their purpose? Why are they immortal? Or effectively immortal, that comes up again, which is a common theme in the book, and it's addressed even more directly in the Netflix adaptation. So just like there was even some commentary on how their lives like interact with time and with generations if you really pay attention to the art in the books. And I don't know, I just really liked that this is like a sub theme that they're concerned with. And I did notice in the very first story, which I want to say was by the original creators, they actually dealt with violence really elegantly. Like for being such a bloody book, you actually never saw the wounds. Like somebody gets a headshot, and of course they live because it's this book.
Right?
But they cover the shot with their hand, so you see what happened. You know exactly what the wound was, and you see a lot of blood, but you don't actually see any of the gore of the wound. And I was like, oh, this is really great. This is a good way to deal with this without the book being super gory. But then like there are other creators dealt with that differently, so it is like some things you do see some bones or it kind of varies. But overall, I was really happy to spend more time with these creators, well, these characters also. So if you are a fan of the Old Guard, I highly recommend this. And if you're not a fan of the Old Guard, it's probably because you haven't read it. So
I was just thinking that I'm like, I should
check it
actually check
out.
this out. I know the first volume of this series is on Hoopla, and I should just get it. Um, were there any, since these were different creators and you had already like you said, read the original like 4 times, did any of the art or writing not like ring true to you in the way that, you know how sometimes people don't quite capture the character in the way that you've been kind of mentalizing them? Did any of these stories feel like not like Old Guard?
I would say they all felt like Old Guard, but there was a couple of stories where I wasn't quite sure who I was supposed to be looking at. Like there was actually 2 stories where Andy's hair is very different, and if you compare those 2 stories together, her hair is the same in both of them. But the first one that I read, I was like, I don't know who this person is. And then it's like clearly Andy as you read her dialogue or see her actions or like how she interacts with the others. Or the fact that she's just the only girl in the group until
Yeah,
the most recent um, volume. So I worked it out, but that I think that was the trickiest part was
cool.
working out the art.
I think that must be so difficult for, I mean, that comes up in comics constantly, right? Especially with all the like capes, these characters that have readers that have been reading them for 20 years, and now you're supposed to write the dialogue in a way and draw the art in a way that feels like that character, but is also still your writing and your art. You know what I mean? That seems like would be one of the most challenging things as a creator, to not have it feel to be different, but not so different that it doesn't ring true, if that makes sense.
I feel like
Right. Yeah.
there's a way that you can kind of do that and I don't want to say breaks the fourth wall. That's not quite the right phrase, but it almost is like the audience is in on the bit. I'm thinking of the Wictive funnies, which was an issue that they did towards the end of the Wictive run, where they just kind of like invited. It seemed like Kieran and Matt and Jamie just invited all their friends who they hadn't been able to invite to work on the book for whatever reason in the run, to just kind of like contribute a short.
Hmm.
And there was no pressure, and it wasn't like in universe, and it was just kind of a like jam session with the characters. And that I think is a really cool way that you can let people play with your toys, basically.
Yeah, I like that way of phrasing it too.
I don't know if I read that one. I swear I read all of Wictive. Was this like a separately released
it
or was this part of the
it
series?
was like, I'll have to find what issue it is. It's part of it's not part of the series in the sense that like it doesn't push the story forward, but it's the characters and it's really funny, and it has just kind of, yeah, it really does feel like you're just like hanging out during a jam session.
That's cool. I feel like I need to reread the last few issues of that because every time I talk about Wictive, I'm like, how did that end? Insanely, but how specifically?
I don't know if I'm emotionally ready to reread it.
Yeah, I have not. I own the all of the trade paperbacks, but I have not read the last 2 or 3, because by the time I got it, I realized that like I needed to reread everything before reading it because I did not remember anymore. And that is enough of an undertaking at that point in the series. It's like several trades to plow through that I just keep not having done it, because if you own it, there's no time rush, whereas the things from the library are due. So, you know how it goes.
Yes.
The first thing I read for this issue, so I first of all, I want to say I really like this new setup where instead of nominating books and all voting for one on the Goodreads and then all reading the same book, we just talk about different. The thread is just discussing different books that we've read or want to read in that theme. So like for this anthologies, because I learned like I tried so many different things from this, and I have things on my TBR now that I didn't get in time from the library to read before this episode, but I really want to. Just a lot of cool stuff. And I like hearing about what, like, when we just nominate stuff, you don't really hear what people think about those books unless it gets picked. And so I really like that part of this new setup. And I think that that has been exciting. But one of the things when going through that thread was Ed mentioned that Image is putting out an anthology maxi series that just started. That's Image exclamation point, as opposed to Image without an exclamation point. I love comic titling. Um, and so number one is there. It's kind of so as he said, and I quote, "This is a standard model in Europe, but doesn't seem to have catch on in the US. Dark Horse tried it with Dark Horse Presents, and it definitely didn't catch on in with me because I have not read anything like this. I know people ever compared it to like Shonen Jump, which is also a thing that I've not read, but I kind of expected it to be like a bunch of first issues of stories, and it definitely is not that. So um, this issue is like 60 some pages long, so it's longer than a normal floppy, but not as long as you'd think for as many stories are in it. So you really just get a few pages of most of the stories. So you get the first chapters of two 12-part stories that will be in every single one of these 12 issues. The Blizzard by Jeff Johns and Andrea Moody, and Red Stitches by Brendan Fletcher and Babs Tarr. And then you get the opening installment of three-parters that'll just be in three of these issues. Um, and then some like one-offs. There's because the whole thing is a combination of ongoing serials and standalone short stories. I will say for me, this read a lot more like a sampler issue that, you know, how some publishers will put out samplers where you get little bits of a bunch of stories that are starting that year. Like Image has done this. And it read very similar to that for me in a way that made me uncomfortable with the $6 price tag. Because usually those samplers are like free or a dollar, where I didn't feel like I was getting a full first issue of like any of these stories. So it's like just little bits. I'm not positive how fair that is. I think we definitely got a decent number of pages for some of the bigger, longer stories, but um I don't think I'm gonna keep going with this. I might pick it up, like, when they finally collect the whole thing in a graphic novel kind of thing, but I didn't really have enough of any one story to get really into it to be like, "Oh boy, I'm gonna go spend $6 next month on it." You know what I mean?
Yeah, does it tell you when something is from an ongoing series as opposed to a standalone for this series?
Image's website talks about it, like, their description of the series and stuff tells you which things are which. I don't remember per se if the issue itself did. I mean, part of the not being that into it for me is that, like, I read this, like, a week ago and couldn't actually tell you what most of the stories were because it just wasn't memorable because 'cause you're not in it that long. Um,
Yeah.
I really am interested the difference how this compares to something like Shonen Jump. Like my understanding of Shonen Jump is that you do get what is would be a single floppy issue of the stories that are in it. Like a full chapter of the manga, right? So you're getting a bunch of complete chapters versus like a couple pages.
Yeah. I know my next question is like, are they going to collect these individual stories to release once they're done?
Yeah, well, and
That's
that's
interesting. I am curious to see how it does.
that me too, because collecting certain stories individually instead of like the whole maxi series together would be really interesting to me because they are very different. And so some of the stories just weren't things that I would typically pick up and I wasn't particularly into. And then other things were a lot cooler that I would totally pick up the trade of just that series, you know, or just that story. So they got a lot of big name people working on this. And I like it as an idea. And I especially like the idea of a Shonen Jump that's so inexpensive where I get a bunch of comic issues for what is it, like $3? Um, but I don't think we're ever going to see that. Not with our model. And I am okay with that because our people don't need to be paid less.
Yeah.
Well, this is the first time I've ever done a Goodreads episode, and I'll just be really honest. It's because my brain refuses to do assignments. So if you tell me
Mhm.
I have to read a book, I'm like, no.
It can be kind of book
Yeah.
reporty. Yeah,
uh,
exactly, and I think that's where,
yeah,
like, you end up, like, not because it feels like almost posting a review assignment, like, write your little book report summary sometimes to, like, do
yeah.
discussion posts then.
So I really liked this shift in the format, and not just because I had more freedom to choose the book that I wanted to read, but I also really like the sort of panel discussion, like seminar style conversation that it will generate in the thread. So I was reading through the thread and I was really surprised by how many people are just like, I don't like anthologies. And we're just kind of like wary of them or not really sure like how to get into them because I really love anthologies, but I kind of am thinking of it from a production standpoint, I guess.
Mhm.
Anthologies have a ton of benefits from a creator perspective. Art is so expensive. Like I don't think people understand how expensive comic book art is. And you can experiment with ideas so much more in 3 to 5 pages than you can in 25 pages. And
Yeah.
so if you're an artist doing an anthology, like you just I think there's a lot more freedom in a sense because there's less that you have to uh, literally produce. At the same time, I think for writers, it's probably more of a challenge because it's very hard to do something good in a shorter page count. I know writers are always wanting more page count, but I think it's a good, healthy challenge for them that and can really help them hone their writing. I think another benefit is you get to collab with creators and that you might not usually get to work with, particularly when you're contributing to like a themed book, like Femme Magnifique by Black Crown, which is I think an IDW imprint, is a really great example. Like you're going to find the coolest artist writer team ups in Femme Magnifique that you're not going to find on a 12 issue run of some Kait book because it's just expensive to produce, but with it, and I imagine it's so much fun to be an editor and like get people together to make some cool little 3-page story. Also, if you are trying to break into comics, this is a great way to network, get your work out there, practice your skills, submit to anthologies. They're great for that purpose. And then for readers, you get to discover new creators. It's like a sampler. For example, I read The Silver
Yeah.
Coin for this episode, and I love Mike Walsh. He is incredibly talented. He is a sweetheart. I would follow his art to the ends of the earth. And so I loved reading The Silver Coin because I love and trust Mike Walsh. And so I got to kind of check out all of these different writers that he's collaborating with, and maybe I wouldn't have read something from them on that was a bigger commitment, but like Mike's vouching for them, so I'll check it out in his anthology series. Also, I think horror is uniquely like great for anthologies and short stories. Also, just as a reader, if you are into challenging yourself as a reader, short stories work a different part of your brain
Yeah.
than reading a long form story. So it's like poetry versus a novel, right? It's just like a different way of thinking. And also, anthologies can be super collectible, limited edition, especially if they're for an event or a fundraiser. So get on those Kickstarters.
I feel like I need to embrace anthologies more. Like, I think I did see the silver coin somewhere, and I didn't pick it up because I was like, "Oh, this is an anthology," and I'm looking for something that's not an anthology. But I couldn't really tell you why because every time I do read an anthology, I mostly enjoy them. I mean, if there's something that I don't enjoy, there's a specific reason. I do like the format of them, that it kind of bounces around a little bit. There's usually a theme, and thinking through it, one of the reasons that I read YA comics and manga is because they're such quick reads, which is exactly what an anthology gives you as well. Like you can just finish a couple of the stories and then stop, and you're not really interrupting the middle of one large story. And
Totally.
I feel the same way about like Like even printed prose books, I have like half a shelf of anthologies that I haven't read. Partially, some of them were for college, and some of them I've picked them up going, I should read more anthologies, and then I haven't. That would give me the same experience that I'm looking for in those quick read comics, where I can just read for an hour or whatever, and then stop because I can. You know,
Mhm.
I'm not interrupting a flow.
I think Hellboy Volume 3, The Chained Coffin and Others is a perfect example of what you're talking about because like love Mike Mignola, love Hellboy, the Mignolaverse and like Hellboy as a character, the backstory like it's huge. Like in continuity there's so much to read. But The Chained Coffin and Others is spectacular for how easily you could just pop in, read a story, and you get Hellboy, you get everything that you want from a Hellboy story, but it's in a short story.
I've actually read that one. I just looked it up. I did like it.
Danny makes an excellent point on the live chat right now that anthologies also have the bonus of being fantastic for taking to conventions because there's less carrying of books. Many creators can sign one book. This is genius. As someone who's hauled trades to a convention before to get signatures, mind blown. This is so smart. I definitely like your point, Tia, about sampling, like a low investment sampling of different authors and artists and stuff like that. To, I think, I don't know if you guys have ever checked out the Best American Comics anthologies that come out each year, but those have been really cool for that for me of like finding new people and new perspectives and new artists and stuff, and reading stuff that I otherwise probably would not have picked up. And those are like each year's is edited by someone different, so they also can have a kind of different feel to them. But I did not actually read any of those for this episode just because they were not immediately available to check out. So I um, I read Killing and Dying by Adrian Tomine, which it was interesting in that I did not realize until after finishing it that it was actually like a part of a series. So this is the hardcover collection by Drawn and Cordially put out. But originally, this was a series called Optic Nerve, and so this collects 12 through 14. But Optic Nerve is just a series of short stories. They're not the same characters. They're connected. I think they're all in the same location, basically, like the same town, but they're not. It's not like an ongoing series in the sense that it's like not an ongoing story. But so this is six unique short stories, not connected. Like they all read like literary fiction. Just really, really good, really, really interesting things that make you think a lot more about like why do people who love one another treat each other poorly and what does that look like and why do people put up with it and why do they leave, like what are the just really complex nuanced look at human relationships within a short story, right? It's just so concise and I love how like in the same way that the writing and pacing is really precise, so is his line work. Like it's so emotive in a way that like feels like there's nothing extra on the page. You know what I mean? Um, so it wasn't until I went to log this on Goodreads that I realized that this was 12 through 14, and I actually want to go back and start at the beginning. Um, which also feels interesting just in the sense of like watching the artist progression, right? When you go look back at the beginning, like how was their writing not as good, polished yet? How was the art? You know, that kind of thing. But I definitely am interested in reading the rest at this point. And like all of Drawn and Quarterlies, this has the best hand feel of a hardcover book to read. Like just really nice paper, really nice printing production. Just highly recommend.
I don't know that I've ever read anything by John and Quarterly, but I know that it's like a big deal, or at least they produce a lot.
They put out really good stuff.
And they definitely, I think, are a more literary comics
Yeah.
focused publisher.
Yeah.
Do you have anything that you want to read that you didn't get to for this episode?
Definitely. I just from the Goodreads thread got so many ideas. So Pandu
I know, me
recommended
too.
the DC Comics 0 year, which is like a 400 plus pages introduction from DC to various characters, which sounds like fun, but also like a real undertaking. And so like throwing that on the TBR for like someday. Um, but then Paul mentioned Broken Frontier, which is an anthology about like new visions of breaking boundaries, exploring the unknown, so on and so forth. Kind of thinking about time travel and dystopia and stuff like that. And that sounds super up my alley. But again, wasn't something that I just like had access to when a couple days ago when we did the swap. And then Moonshot sounds super cool. The Indigenous Comics collection that Lenny brought up and said she was going to read.
Yeah, that one looks good for me too. I Yeah, so last year we did an anthology month on Goodreads, and we picked the one book, and I don't think it was this book, but one of the options was Trickster, which is a Native American
Mm-hmm.
anthology about the creature of the trickster. I've had this book for years. I own a first printing of this book because I got it when I was going through my publishing program back in like 2012 maybe 2011. Anyway, so it's been over a decade and I haven't read this book yet, but it looks great. It looks beautiful. Like the even just like the trim size of it is almost square, so it's like visually
Oh,
unique just sitting
cool.
on the shelf.
Yeah.
And I have to read this.
Yeah, I was thinking
I have no
about
excuse.
like, do I even own any anthology comics? And I, short of like really digging into my boxes and stuff, I'm pretty positive the only anthology I own is Love is Love, the comic book anthology that was to benefit the survivors of the Orlando Pulse shooting. I really don't think I own any other ones. But that was another one of those like Tio was mentioning that these come up as like a fundraisers oftentimes.
um yeah, I actually do own another anthology that I haven't read yet, and that's Pros and Cons. Would you like to tell us about that book, Tia?
I think this is a wonderful book that everyone should buy. It's an anthology of short comics and essays by people who are comic book pros in one way or another, whether they're creators, or maybe they work in PR, editors, things like that, and just sort of their experiences going to Comic Cons.
I bought this shortly after it came out, and I apologize deeply because I haven't read it yet. It is in a pile with like 2 or 3 dozen other books, but it needs to get to the top of the pile.
I feel like the essay that I wrote for it, it just feels like a relic from another life at this point, from the before times. My
Mm-hmm.
essay is about how I always wear very uncomfortable, impractical shoes at cons, and how it helps me sort of feel like I'm cosplaying the best version of myself. And this is now going on 2 years of barely ever putting on like non sweatpants. So
Yeah.
Yeah. Barely putting on shoes for me. I put on a pair of boots the other day and wore them for about 2 hours, and now I have 4 blisters.
oh no.
Oh
I used every former ballerina trick in the book with blisters and uncomfortable shoes at cons.
Oh, I should do that. I also danced for, I don't know, my teenage years basically. Didn't even think about that.
Get the ouch pouches.
Yeah. Do you guys have anything else that you want to add about anthologies? I feel like it's been a really good discussion already.
yeah. I mean, we were talking a bit on the Discord like hangout last night about um this Neil Gaiman collection that I read about where I read this and I was like, is this an anthology? I don't know, but I wanted to talk about it because it was actually my favorite of all the things I read for this episode. Where this is okay, so it's the Neil Gaiman Library Volume 1, where Dark Horse has put out basically these collected editions of what are independent graphic novels by Neil Gaiman. So this includes 4 complete graphic novels in this one edition that weighs like roughly 10 pounds. So it includes A Study in Emerald, Murder Mysteries, How to Talk to Girls at Parties, and Forbidden Brides. And to me, it didn't read like an anthology because they're so long, right? They are just OGNs basically, but they are short stories. Like they're shorter than a normal OGN, I guess. All of the stories were originally written as prose short stories by Gaiman, and then each of these, the adaptation for the script, the art and colors and letters are all different book to book. So it's a cool conglomeration of like how all these different creators have come together and adapted these stories. And it's where you take like the original story and idea from Gaiman, um, which I have read some of these in his books versus like the comics before reading the comic, but how they all basically adapted these in pretty different ways with very, very different art styles. And so it was cool, an anthology feel in that way. But other than that, like when I was sitting reading it, when I was reading one story for over an hour, that doesn't feel like an anthology reading experience to me. Do you know what I mean? But I think it is one still, like in the sense that like it's a collection of stories, right? With a kind of a unifying theme that they're all Neil Gaiman. But I really liked it. I got volume 2 out already because this is just a super convenient way to read all of these instead of having to like check out the individual books. And I like the printing that they did in the dimensions. It's bigger, so it shows off the art more.
I keep trying different things by Neil Gaiman, and I have read things that I've really liked. Like I've read the Graveyard Book multiple times in multiple different formats, comics and prose and audio, I think. So he does have some stuff out that I really like, but I don't know. A lot of it, for some reason, it seems incomplete to me. A lot of his work, like he gets really close to something that I would really enjoy, and then it just kind of falls a little bit short a lot. So I don't know. Maybe I'll have to try this one.
Maybe, yeah, I do think he has a very specific style of writing, both for his short story collections and his novels that you're either like into or not. And so I'd never feel like, oh my gosh, you're wrong if you're not into it. Like, no, it's a very distinct style in the same way that like Monty Python is a very distinct style of comedy, right? I'm like, I get
Yeah.
why people like it. It like you just might not be for you. And I happen to really enjoy his stuff. Um, but yeah, they are weird, and they all do have. That's one of the things that's more like feels more anthology is they're all definitely Gaiman stories. You could not mistake them for anything else, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a lot of his books in my to read list. I need to focus on a few of them and get them read. This episode has been Kait needs to read.
Yeah, same.
I love Neil Gaiman movies, like movies based on Neil Gaiman books, but the only Neil Gaiman book I've ever liked reading was Good Omens. So I think I really like Terry Pratchett.
That might be it too. Yeah. Like I really like that one too. That was but I really like his other books as well, and I love his short story collections. So but I also just kind of like weird fantasy is a general rule, like
Yeah.
magical realism, weird fantasy, weird like kind of
Mhm.
distinct sci-fi, like people playing with form in sci-fi and fantasy.
And it's all slightly dark.
Yeah, exactly. And I do have to say, like, I always need to be in the right like headspace or mood for it. Because it's I don't know. I also love his reading voice. Like he's one of those audiobook narrators that I would just listen to him read the phone book. I think it's that very specific type of British accent that I'm just like, yes.
That's true. I agree with that.
They came out with a live, like one of the not live, the full cast recordings of American Gods, and I was like, why? Like, we already had a Gaiman reading. It's so unnecessary.
Yeah.
Did you watch the Good Omens show?
I did, and I watched it so quickly that I don't remember watching
Oh
it.
my god, I loved it so much. So funny.
All right. Well, I feel like that's been a really good episode, unless you guys have something else you want to say.
We have said it all.
Awesome. Good job, us. So next week episode is Paul, Nick, and Kara for another commissioned episode from our pal and patron Cinco, all about comics created by musicians or comics that have dedicated soundtracks. That sounds like a great group to discuss that topic, so I'm
Yeah.
very excited about it. Follow us on Goodreads. Tia is Portrait of Madam X. I am Kait Elfier, and the show is at IRCB Podcast. This episode first aired on Patreon, and it's possible because of our wonderful patrons. Join today for our exclusive series like the IRCB Movie Club, Saga of Saga, and more, and you can join that at patreon.com/IRCB Podcast.
If you haven't already, please rate and review our show. 5 stars is recommended on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts because we deserve it.
You can also join the IRCB Discord community to chat comics and more. Plus, you can listen to our episodes live as we record every week. Check the link to our Discord in the show notes.
Podcasts grow best when spread by word of mouth. That sounds dirty, but it really isn't. So why not tell your friends, family, and local comic shop about IRCB?
Spread the good news.
Infinity Shred is the best. They do all of our music. Thank you to Xander, who is a very cool guy and a great DM, and he edits the show.
Normally Xander edits the show, but this week I was the editor. Me, Mike. So thanks to me, okay?
Thank you to, if you chimed in on Discord, Danny, Stephanie, and Mike and Tom for a second there. Thank you for listening to this entire episode. If you've made it this far, I hope that I hosted well for my first time. And until next time, comics are good and so are you.